Welcome to the Sanders Review. My name is Caleb Sanders. I'm a teacher. I love reading and playing games that are all fantasy, sci-fi, and very nerdy historical fiction, all sorts of things. But I really love just focusing on good storytelling and good world building. Those are really key aspects that I love, and that helps me just kind of navigate things in life, as I'm sure we all can very much identify with. Today, I really have been looking forward these last couple weeks to talking about a series by Gwynne called The Bloodsworn. This series just culminated with the release of the last book a couple weeks ago. It took me a couple weeks to get through the book because 2 kids, teaching, all sorts of stuff going on in life. And sometimes you just have to take time to enjoy a good new book. So The Bloodsworn by Gwynne is not his first series. He actually has many other good series. There's The Faithful and the Fallen is one of his most well-known, which I want to do a series about that, a video about that at some point. But I want to focus today on the series that I think is his best work. Has its issues, which we will talk about at the end, but I want to see just one, if you have read the series, I really am curious what you think about my thoughts on it, and if you have not read it, I'm hoping this spoiler-free, for the most part, series will inspire you to go look into it and give it a try. The Bloodsworn by Gwynne is a 3-book trilogy that is set in a Viking-inspired Norse mythology, a high fantasy world known as Vigriith. So very Scandinavian-inspired. If you're thinking about like Norway, Sweden, that region, there's other lands that come into it that are more desert in climate, but the majority of this book is focused on this Vigriith land. This is a Norse mythology world, so a lot of elements being pulled from Norse mythology. There is a world that has been created and ruled over by the gods, but 300 years before was a god war in which those gods destroyed the earth and each other in the process, and humanity has been recovering for 300 years since. Now, anything Viking related is going to immediately inspire me. I mean, my family has Norse Scandinavian ancestry, and for my brother, I've shared this in in Bernard Cromwell's The Last Kingdom book review that I did, that I actually have a Viking tattoo for my brother's memorial. A little bit up there. It's a little faded, but I need to get touched up at some point. And so this heritage is not, I've never been able to go to Scandinavia. I would love to, but it is a heritage that my brother actually reminded me a lot of with his hunting and fishing and things that he loved to do, remind me of our ancestry. And so anything Norse related is always really cool to me. There's things that come into this series that are very much inspired by Norse mythology or just Norse history. Just actual things like soldiers utilizing short blades known as a sax, playing a game called Toffel, which I actually have a version. My brother from the who passed away, he actually and we played a game called Nefertafel, which is King's Table. It is a very interesting game. That's an asymmetrical game where the goal of the center smaller force is just to let the king escape. It's an amazing game. If you've never checked it out, if you like chess and checkers, it's a really cool game to play. I might talk about games I like to play at some point. A lot of things I like to talk about, just like so many people like to talk about. Where's I at? As I said, in this world of Vigriith, in the Bloodsworn, the gods have destroyed the world. The creator god was known as Snaka. He was this giant, massive snake, and all the gods are shape-shifting, by the way. Known as Snaka, this massive snake that, through process of the book, you find out how he died. There was Orna, the eagle god, Bursur, the bear god. You have Leek Rifa, the dragon god. You have Ofrir, which is the wolf god, and many others, Rata, the rat god. And these gods, most of them died out. A few of them were imprisoned. That's central to the plot. What you find out is these gods, because they were shapeshifters, a lot of them have children, and the blood of the gods has been passed down. And these tainted, quote unquote, have magical powers that are infused within them. So an example like this would be Bursur, the bear god. His children have extreme strength and rage, thus Berserkir, which, if you know your Norse mythology, berserker. So I love that tie-in with the actual Norse history, with the legends and fighting styles that are brought up a lot. Another thing that is included in this, I think, is really good, is that Gwynne did include shield maidens being along in the fighting, so it's not just men out fighting. We know the Vikings did not just go out and raid. In fact, the Vikings, the Norse, they went to trade. Viking was more of an occupation and not the actual like name of what they went and did. So they would go Viking, they would go raiding, but they were Norse, they were merchants. And these raiders, they would often have women along that most historians believe would come along and fight behind the ranks or over on the sides and be able to help out in various ways. little thing John Gwynne he included because of these God-descended beings being extremely powerful, some of them, and then although they're thralled, so they're controlled by magic. He does include a lot of women fighting in the front lines, which historically not the most accurate from that time period, but it fits into the narrative that he writes with the fighting style and with the strength of these women, especially with the god-descended women. And so a lot of elements that John Gwynne ties into here, and the warfare is actually really interesting to read because John Gwynne, he actually goes, and there's a picture of him in his on his books. He actually is wearing chainmail. He's a reenactor, and so he and his kids go out and they go and reenact Viking battles, which, I mean, come on, that's pretty badass if you ask me. So the last thing I'm going to mention about the setting for this world is the fact that you have these jarls, these lords that have these different kingdoms across the island, the peninsula of Ygritte, and you have these monsters in the wilderness, the Skraelings and the trolls and the Tenure, and all these different monsters of very interesting origin and have different interesting habits, we'll just say, just including some like teeth, we'll just say that. So the world is so fascinating, but we'll talk more about that when we go on into it. So that is a little bit of summary of the world that John Gwynne creates, and moving forward, just a little bit about each book, just highlighting about why you might be interested in picking up this series. The first book in the Bloodsworn trilogy is The Shadow of the Gods. I mean, honestly, if you were going to have a book with a dragon on the cover, we've all seen it. Dragons are one of the most commonly written about fantasy creatures. That will do it. I mean, come on, that's an absolutely amazing cover. Really want to shout out the artist. I'll put this in the tag as well. The artist's name was Marcus Winnie, the illustrator who actually did it, and he just did it phenomenally. I'll try to put up here the picture of the actual full picture of the dragon along with other books that will come just to see their covers. And that is very indicative of the way, kind of some elements of the story, we will just say. The Shadow of the Gods follows a 3 POV narration going through the series, alternating between chapters, so you'll never get the same character, usually back to back, maybe occasionally you'll get that. This was actually a really interesting and good development because the Faithful and the Fallen series that John Gwynne wrote, he had 6 POVs with a bunch of extra characters that came in, and even more that developed throughout the series. And so you kind of had to jump around and know a lot of characters. And this one, while there are a lot of characters and it gets a little repetitive, one thing that's interesting in the later books is that he does include names and descriptions and summaries so you can kind of keep caught up with the developments of the series as it goes. But this 3 POV is very interesting. You follow one woman named Orca, who is a steading holder, she and her husband, and it starts off with her teaching her son how to hunt, and you're very much introduced to her mentality about the world in which they live in. And let's just say events start taking on, and revenge and rescue becomes her motivation throughout the entirety of the 3-book trilogy. Another character that you follow is a woman named Elvar. She is part of a group called the Battle Grim. They basically are not bounty hunters, but they track down tainted that are uncollared and capture them and be able to go and sell them into slavery, into thraldom, and using magical collars that are slivers of the collar and the chains that brought down the gods, we'll just say. And through that power, through that mysticism and that control of these different, either berserker bear-blooded or wolf-blooded or snake-blooded, these beings, these people who have these, they're tainted, they're corrupted is what people say, but we know that they're humans who just have these extra powers. We follow Elvar as she goes and they catch people and they go and you get to know her and the people around her in the Battle Grim, these battle mercenary groups, and you start to learn her motivations and what she is trying to prove to herself and to others, and especially her father, as you go through the story, we'll just say. The third POV in this follows a man named Varg, who is a former thrall. He's a runaway slave who's been able to get the key to his collar and unlock it. And you find him going. He has a mission to be able to use. He has a single lock of hair from his sister, who has either disappeared or died. He's kind of trying to figure that out, but pretty sure she had died at that point. And he decides to go and try to find help. And he finds help in the Bloodsworn, which is another mercenary group that he eventually becomes part. We'll just say that. So the first book follows across the entirety of Ygritte during the Shadows of the Gods, and you follow these different storylines and various arcs following them and sometimes crossing paths along the way as you explore the world, as you explore the creatures in the world and the people and characters along the way, as chaos ensues by the end. So just that is the first book. If I had to describe this in adjectives, the Shadow of the Gods is bloody and full of power struggles. That is what I will just say. Power struggles between the thralled and the unthralled, or the controllers of the thralls, power struggles between the jarls, the former gods, all these different things. I would say bloody and power struggles. The Shadow of the Gods was rated 4.2 on Goodreads, which I would say for me was a little bit low. I would put it in that like 4.5 for me as a teacher. I would put it in the B+ range. It had some issues, which I'll talk about later, but it was a very solid book and very exciting to read. So I would say that 4.2 is a little bit low. Shadow of the Gods, definitely check it out if you're interested in this. It's not for everybody, but I would say a lot of people I've talked to have really gotten into it. The second book of the Bloodsworn trilogy is The Hunger of the Gods, and just like the Shadow of the Gods, this cover, yeah, probably one of my favorite covers of that I own. It's definitely up there. And so The Hunger of the Gods starts immediately following the end of the Shadow of the Gods. And again, this is mostly spoiler free. And so you continue on following your three major characters. You follow Orca as she continues on her quest after a bloodbath, we'll just say. She has found friends and she's picked up people along the way in her quest for revenge and for rescue. You follow Elvar as she is expanding in leadership within the Battle Grim, as she has extra sources of power, we will just say. Just saying, as some things come into control along the way. That is all I will say. And you also follow Varg as he is continuing on and becoming a member of the Bloodsworn. He is growing in his battle skill. He's growing in his friendships and relationships. And the story continues in various ways as the Bloodsworn get called into various situations. You also have two new POVs with a man named Dior, who has a very important storyline from the Shadow of the Gods from the first book. You follow him as the storyline goes into the antagonist and villain side of things, so you can understand where they're coming from as the mythical creatures, as the thralls, the corrupted, the descendants of the gods are trying to make their way and find peace and safety in the world of Vigri, this Norse-inspired world. And the last POV that is also an antagonist is a guy named Guthvar, who we don't like him. Now, these are POVs and characters that expand the world in amazing ways. You expand the power struggles, you expand the understanding of the magic systems, and you love to hate them in a way. And they definitely expand your knowledge of the gods, your knowledge of the politics of the time period, and just expands to a very explosive ending, I would say, for this book. The middle is a little slow at times, but there are little things throughout with monsters, with hunting, with attacks and battles and gods and magic and everything that really keep this driving forward. If I had to describe the Hungers of the Gods, it is expansion, that's of everything, world, character, plot, everything. Expansion and gritty. The first one with bloody, this one continues that, but this gets very gritty in the trenches and just the emotions that start coming out through this book. That is just all I will say, and revenge carries a huge weight in this book. Hunger of the Gods actually has a 4.54 rating on Goodreads, which is really, really good. I would actually give this a solid A rating. It is still not a perfect book, but most books aren't. There are some things that I have a little bit of issue with. Again, I'll talk about that later. But solid A, amazing book, and probably one of my favorite covers. I mean, those are people. You can see where the Norse mythology is really inspiring some of these book covers and the legends that John Gwynne is writing about. The third and final book of the Bloodsworn trilogy, and the one that just came out 2 weeks ago, and I've been waiting for a couple years for this book to come out, and that is The Fury of the Gods. I mean, look, scale, scope, you know your Norse mythology, you know exactly what they're always talking about and referencing here, and this is just an amazing book. When it released, I was like, oh boy, this is going to be a climactic finish. And The Fury of the Gods definitely pays off with that. It again starts immediately after the end of Hunger of the Gods. You continue with your POVs, you're expanding your characters, you're expanding, and you've lost them along the way, you're expanding others. And this story ramps up. It has its middle. I will say that it has a little bit of a doldrum in the middle, but it ramps up very significantly with a lot of very interesting stories. You do have a culmination of a lot of revenge, a lot of kept promises with hunting down and taking out, but you also find out a few more, so that just kind of adds to the stakes a little bit. A few more people who are targets for revenge and things like that. Without giving spoilers, this book goes on and you start to see the underlying chaos of what was before the world of the gods, and you see what this new world possibly could be with everyone working together in harmony, or maybe not harmony, but just in mutual benefit, which is what I would just say at that point. The description for this book, I would just say, is carnage. Absolute carnage. Very beautifully written. I would say John Gwynne is a master of the plot twist, or of the interesting, maybe not unforeseen, but definitely the turn of the page, the turn of the plot, the turn of expectations. I will say John Gwynne does an amazing job with that. So Carnage and Climactic is this series. The way in which it ramps up and the way in which it ends, I believe, is very well written, very amazing. On Goodreads right now, this is a 4.6 rating. Now that's, I would say, a little bit high. I would say this drops back down to about an A-. So probably my second favorite of the series. So it would go Hunger of the Gods, followed by Fury of the Gods, followed by The Shadow of the Gods. But these are all really good books. They're not perfect, but they have a lot going for them that just resonates with me, just like there are other series that resonate with you, I am sure. With all of that said, I want to talk a little bit about the strengths and weaknesses of this series. The strengths is obviously, from what I've already explained, going to be the world building and just the expansion of this very realized world with the spirits and the trees and the mountains and just everything that is in place in this. The world building is just absolutely amazing. The action is very visceral. It is very in your face. Is it a little too much? I mean, that for me might be a solid aspect of the series. It's maybe not as much of a strength, but for sure the strengths I would definitely put up. The action sequences do get you, but they do kind of stretch on along. And characters I would put in solid. They're not the strongest. I wish there were more small moments, right? Yes, they include the sitting around the campfire and the talk and a few little things here and there, but I just feel like John Gwynne, he writes such big epic scenes that the little moments, the little things, for me, a few of the smaller motivations might be missed. A little subtle descriptions, subtle details, but that's not bad. They're really solidly written. So I would say world building is top. Character development and character realization is the next one, and just the action and just what plays out in this story is just absolutely amazing. I've already talked about all the elements that I really like. I just want to highlight all of those strengths. I've alluded to a couple things here as a weakness, kind of, and that is going to be occasionally the pacing in these books, because you go and you'll have these massive action then lull, then action then lull, then action then lull. It just seems to be very staccato of a action lull, action lull. And as a reader, you kind of maybe want to have a more, you want to be surprised, but you also don't want to expect, oh, well, it's been a little while, we should be expecting some action at this point, and kind of just change it up a little bit. That's just a little nitpick. It gets a little predictable with the pacing, and it's a little hard at times to work within that. The other thing is that plot is a little minimal. You have a lot of major plot things through. I would say it's just the weaker element. If you think about world building, characters, and plot, the plot for me is probably a little bit on the weaker element. As you read, it's very straightforward. And what you begin with, you can kind of tell where it's going to end, I would say, because there's not the major turns to plot. Is very straightforward in plot in terms of power, in terms of struggle, and all of that. The next thing I would like to bring up is that John Gwynne, I don't know exactly his writing style, but I would bet that he is a pantser, which means that he very much jumps in with minimal planning and just starts writing in this world that he wants to create, which is not bad. But when you're a pantser, when you start writing without a pure plan, there are some things that, if you pick up on it, can pull the reader out of the story a little bit. For example, in the first book, Shadow of the Gods, the description for that book, it says that it's been 100 years since the gods' war, where they all fell or were captured. And in the book, as you read through it, says 300 pages now, or 300 years. So that is not a major change, not major at all, but it makes you stop and say, wait, it said, it pulls you out from that reading. It pulls you out of your suspension of disbelief where you are in that world. And as a lover of stories, that's something that I love, is to get invested and be in that world. And that kind of takes me out a little bit. The final thing I want to mention is just when it comes to covers, I view covers a little bit like promises. For example, in Shadow of the Gods, you read this knowing at some point, now as you read through the book, you understand, you read about this captured dragon goddess named Likrifa, that this cover promises something, and it is fully realized, okay? And that's something that throughout the book you are understanding this is what it's going to. It's almost a promise that that is what you're going to. In The Hunger of the Gods, you have, again, a promise that you're having humans. You have this big, massive wolf, Ulfrir, which from the end of the first book to this one, this is promising that something is going to happen, something's going to come about, and it realizes that very well. Now, in The Fury of the Gods, as beautiful as this cover is, this promises something. This promises something that is going to be majorly impactful, and it feels a little bit convenient in the reading, and when you read the story, it feels like it was a very convenient story decision that John Gwynne made to include this, and it just seems like it was a little anticlimactic. I just feel like it was so impactful, this happening. If you know the story, if you've read the story, it's just something I think could have been just built in more into the book. I would have been very happy to include a lot more of these elements that are related to this cover image, but that's nitpicking. I just think that the cover did not pull through with the promise of the story like the first two covers. So that's just a few of my thoughts on the series of the Bloodsworn. I know this is a longer video. I absolutely love this series. I would give it a solid A- overall. As a series. That is a really good 4.5 rating I would give the entire series. Very amazing writing, very amazing just story and creativity from John Gwynne. And I hope you like it. If you've liked reading that series, if you've read it, I would love to hear from you in the comments if that's something that you've identified, if there's some areas that you think that I was slightly off, or areas that stood out to you that you loved about this story. If you've never read this series, give it a try. If you don't like grimdark high fantasy that is very visceral and brutal and fighting, it's probably not for you. But for me as a historian, it stands out with the things that it describes and the characters and all that. So thank you so much for watching today. I hope you have an amazing week. If you're interested in what I talk about on my channel, right up here is one of my top 10 favorite books called The Last Kingdom by Bernard Cromwell. Right up here are 6 fantasy books that I DNF, did not finish, and so some really fun discussions there. Hope you have an amazing day. Read some amazing stories. God bless, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.